Hi, everybody. I'm George, and this is the best little horror house in Philly, the show where we talk about the best horror movie ever made, according to our guest, at least. And you can find today's guest writing about and talking about movies all over Philadelphia, but especially on the I Like to Movie podcast. Garrett Smith is here. How's it going, Garrett?
Pretty good. How are you, George?
I'm doing really well. Why don't you tell the good people at home a little bit about your show?
I Like to Movie is a podcast where me and my co-host, Dan Scully, really just talk about movies. We pick like one movie every episode and just kind of dig into it. We like to talk theme and meaning, and there's no particular actual theme to the show. Like we just watched The Taking of Pelham 123 as our most recent episode, the 1973 movie, I think. That is the year of the original. But then we also, we interviewed the director of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, Secret of the Ooze, a couple weeks before that. So you can find, all kinds of stuff on our show, and it's fun.
Yeah, you guys jump around, but it's all very fun. You guys keep it pretty light. I liked your Burbs episode. You know, I'm always here to see Tom Hanks in a horror movie, you know?
Heck yes, dude. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, and that episode features the co-writers of Summer of '84, which is heavily influenced by the Burbs.
Yeah, and another fun movie. So
yes, yeah.
I definitely encourage people to check out that episode of your show.
Man, thank you so much.
Are you guys? I mean, well, really you, but are you guys both into horror? Would you say?
Yeah, very much. So my co-host Dan is just a genre nerd, going back his whole life. And I kind of am. I was more of a science fiction kid. I was really into Star Wars, but also just sci-fi movies in general were kind of my thing growing up. I didn't get into horror until a little bit later in life. I kind of really came around on it in college, just after college. But now it is most of what I watch and write about. It has become kind of my. We on our show, the title is mostly just a joke. I like to movie, but we do talk about this concept of movies on the show occasionally, which for us we define that horror movies kind of are the best example of movies. It's a movie that is just utilizing every little inch of the genre of movies to tell its story. And so where movies are this collection of, light, sound, performance, it's using every little piece of that to its fullest extent. And I feel like horror movies are always a great example of that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Since you say that you were sort of a sci-fi person growing up, do you find that you still skew that way when you're watching horror?
It's funny. I don't actually. I heard you ask people this on some other episodes of your podcast, and for me, as I've sort of come into my own as a horror fan, kind of later in life, I have found myself gravitating towards slashers more than anything else. That's kind of my big go-to. I love slasher movies.
One of us.
Yes. I Friday the 13th was a series that I got heavily into maybe 3 or 4 years ago, having never seen any of them. That's I have huge holes in my sort of horror nerddom, you know what I mean? And I've been sort of trying to fill those over the years, and so I did a big Friday the 13th watch maybe 3 years ago or something, and I just totally fell in love with that series. And from there, just kind of bounced around to all of the famous slasher franchises, and not that I've seen them all yet, but I don't know. Every time I watch one, I get more and more into it. And now I've caught up with some of the weirder stuff. I always refer to it as Fall Break because that's what it was originally called. But The Mutilator, is that what that goes by, right?
Yep.
The Mutilator rocks. I just have been getting into all corners of slasher movies lately.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Honestly, I think that one of the joys of coming to the genre later in life is being able to have more of a sense of what's good and, really dive in and explore the genre.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so I kind of want to respond to that in two ways. This is why every podcast I'm on is 90 minutes, because I'm I have 4 answers to this. But, on one hand, I do, kind of totally agree with you, because, I saw Black Christmas for the first time in college, and, I liked it. But I didn't really appreciate that movie until I saw it again many years later, and now it is one that to me is one of the defining slashers. I love that movie.
Yeah, it's great.
But then the flip side of that is I have also, living in Philly, become a big Exhumed Films head. Do you go to their shows? Are you familiar with them?
No, I'm actually not familiar.
So Exhumed Films is this group in Philly that does screenings of basically exploitation movies from the 60s and 70s and 80s.
I'm listening.
And they collect 35 millimeter and 16 millimeter prints of those movies.
Wow.
So they do these like crazy. So they do the 24-hour horror marathon every year.
Oh, okay.
Where they just screen horror movies back to back for 24 straight hours. But again, all on 35 millimeter. A lot of like hard to find stuff. Like I just listened to your Shin Godzilla episode today. It was fantastic. I got to see a version of Godzilla that's like extremely hard to see from the 70s that Luigi Cozzi sort of directed.
Wow.
It's sort of referred to as Cozilla by the fandom. But anyway, so it's like I have also gotten into a lot of terrible shit. You know what I mean? Like I also like a lot of kind of bad horror movies as well. I have like, I think coming to it later in life, I actually have a wider appreciation for it, if that makes sense. Like I can appreciate both the really good stuff and the bad stuff for all of what it is. You know?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions. We're diving into the movie here now.
Yes.
We're talking about 2018's Mandy, directed and co-written by Panos Cosmatos. Amazing name.
Yes, yeah.
He also directed 2010's Beyond the Black Rainbow, and he's also the son of George Cosmatos, director of such hits as Cobra and Tombstone.
Yes.
Which Panos actually was the second unit video assist operator on. So that was his big break.
I think I knew that. What? And hold on, before we move off of this really quick, I want to look up George because I forgot to look him up right before this, and I just watched like a movie or two that he directed recently, and so I want to look him up really quick. I apologize that I'm taking the time to do this in the middle of your show.
No problem. While you look it up, I'll say that Tombstone kicks ass.
Yeah.
But interestingly, there is some debate about how much of it he actually directed. A lot of people say that Kurt Russell had a huge hand in directing it, even though his name is not officially on the directing slate, because...
And I feel like that's one of those things that kind of like goes around Hollywood about him in general, right? That he tends to take a little bit of control of some of the movies that he's a part of.
He does, and the original director of Tombstone got fired in the middle of it. And so when George was brought on, there was a certain element of Kurt Russell having already been there and understanding sort of the way that things worked on set. So there's been varying levels of confirmation about this over the years. But, I certainly think that it would be impossible for a director who has done some pretty great movies like Cobra to, be on set and have zero influence on a movie. So,
well, and here's what I'll say about that, because now I'm looking this up, and here's the two movies I saw of his recently. Rambo First Blood Part 2. I saw that for the first time this year. And Leviathan, the like underwater sort of alien ripoff movie from 89, which I liked quite a bit, actually. That movie was really fun. But I think you can kind of tell from his career that I could kind of see why you might hire him to take over Tombstone when perhaps an actor was becoming difficult to sort of get the movie made under, because he had worked with Stallone prior to that. Like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He seems to be used to working, and my understanding is Stallone is another one of those guys that kind of conquers whatever movie he's starring in,
Sure.
Which immediately then my brain just went to, wait, they starred in a movie together, which must have then been a nightmare to make, I assume. Tango Cash, right there? Yeah.
Yeah, that probably was hell.
Yeah. I also see here that George directed an episode of Joe Bob's Drive-In Theater back in 1995.
Well, there you go. Bringing it full circle.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, so I am also a fan of Panos' father. I think he actually made some like pretty cool, interesting genre movies himself.
Yeah.
Panos has kind of become a favorite of mine.
Yeah, and he's part of this new Greek weird wave, I would say.
Okay, wait, hit me with that. What is that? Define that for me.
So, George Lanthimos, Yorgay, as he's affectionately known, is sort of at the center of this. And he's the guy who did Dogtooth, Killing of a Sacred Deer, The Lobster, and The Favorite. And sort of after the financial crisis in Greece, this new film wave sort of sprung up where there's like an intense sense of detachment and surrealism to it, where the people act in just these really bizarre ways that creates kind of an emotional alienation between you and them. And the scenarios are usually like impossible or at the very least implausible, but presented as grounded. Like, we're going to turn you into a lobster if you don't fall in love, or your wife is kidnapped and killed by a cult, and now you're on a drug and revenge-fueled murder rampage.
Yes, indeed. Got it.
I think it's a really interesting wave of film that's coming out sort of at the same time as art house horror wave. And I think that they kind of share a lot in common in terms of the focus on aesthetic and color, with maybe less emphasis on communicating the story in a unobfuscated way.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, like, having listened to your podcast a bunch now, you often go through the sort of plot beat by beat, and I was thinking to myself, like, that is going to do a weird disservice to Mandy, although I'm actually excited to sort of talk about Mandy in that way, because
Yeah.
I think it's going to be rare that I'll ever have the opportunity to go through it beat by beat like that. But it is a movie that is much more, in my opinion, about its feelings. It's a movie that communicates with me not really on like a plot level and not on like even a narrative level necessarily. I feel like this is a movie that is mostly about mood and atmosphere and the way it communicates with you through those things, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. The way that I describe several of the things in this wave, but particularly Mandy, is sort of like a tone poem.
Yes.
Where it's really like you say, you just sort of let the emotions wash over you, and you absorb the movie that way, and everything else, if you're getting stuff out of the story and everything, that's just icing on the cake.
Yeah, so I watched this again. I watched Mandy yesterday. Yeah, yesterday afternoon, and I didn't even realize it actually. But it was the fifth time I've watched it since it came out just 2 years ago.
Wow.
I bought it on Blu-ray like right when it was available. I saw it in theaters too. But so anyway, so like I've actually seen it like a bunch of times, and I don't do that often in general. You know what I mean? Like rewatch certain movies over and over and over again. I used to when I was younger, but I don't do it that much anymore, especially with newer stuff. And this one just, I don't know. This movie casts some kind of spell, and I don't know. I love watching this movie. I just sort of fall under its spell every time.
Yeah, and I think that it's really interesting that this movie does kind of get its hooks in you that way, because it's produced by Spectrevision, which I think that that company does a really good job of picking movies to produce that do something like, for people who aren't familiar with them, they're the production company founded by Daniel Noah, Elijah Wood, and Josh C. Waller, and they've made movies, a lot of weird, smaller horror movies, like Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, which I've definitely mentioned on the show before, The Greasy Strangler, which is one of the weirdest and most fun, crazy movies I've seen in a very long time.
That has been on my list to see for a while.
Oh my God, it is crazy. And this year, Color Out of Space is one of my favorite movies of the year so far. And
yeah, loved that movie.
And they produced that as well. And so, really capitalizing on these weirdo scripts. I love that Elijah Wood is really taking a chance on some of these weirdo horror movies and giving them a chance to shine.
Yeah, man, he's like the best.
Yeah.
Like he's like, I don't know, when I think about just how much I love watching genre movies and thinking about the idea of like, man, if I had the opportunity to just like fund somebody's movie, like find a creator I like and let them do their thing, I would love to do that. And I love that is just what he's made a career of over the last decade.
Yeah, he's living the dream.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And they made this movie for just around $6 million, which is really shocking.
It is. I mean, every penny of that is on the screen in this movie.
Oh, yeah. And there are several talented actors in it, including Bill Duke, Andrea Riseborough, and Linus Roach. But let's be honest, this movie stars Nick Cage.
It sure does. This is not a term that I necessarily invented, but I love using it. I mean, this is definitely one of the crowning achievements of what I like to refer to as the Cage exploitation genre. He just, he's made a career of kind of what a lot of people would call overacting and stuff, especially over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And to me, one of the beautiful things about Mandy, for one thing, I love Nicolas Cage and don't think that dude deserves to get the shit that he gets sometimes. But Panos is one of very few directors that has found a way to get both Oscar-winning actor Nicolas Cage and the he refers to himself sometimes as the California Klaus Kinski. Like both versions of Nicolas Cage are in this movie.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very rare filmmaker that has been able to figure out how to synthesize both of those versions of Nick Cage.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I am not only a Nick Cage apologist, I'm an active defender.
Agreed. Yes, I'm right there with you.
And I think that it's to Panos' credit that he managed to do this, because I think that Nick Cage is really just like a force of nature, and all you can do is just point him in the direction and work around what he's bringing, because he is a movie star in the way that I think that few people are these days. You have Tom Cruise, where that's the name above the marquee, or that's on the marquee, and you're like, wow, this is a Tom Cruise movie. And I think that you get that with Nick Cage as well, where it's a Nick Cage movie.
Yeah, I mean, these movies bend around these performers, right? As
Right.
opposed to the other way around.
Yeah.
And I do think you can feel that in this movie. I mean, specifically, I don't know if you have this in your research, but like, he wasn't even offered the role of Red initially.
Right.
They wanted him to play Linus Roche's character.
Jeremiah Sand. Yeah.
Yeah, Jeremiah, which makes a lot of sense to me that Jeremiah would be this older weirdo, right?
Yeah.
And kind of is in the context of the movie still. But I believe Panos said that his sort of original concept for the character of Red was like a younger man, was not somebody of like Cage's age or even build or anything like that, you know? And so then Cage says, yes, I want to do your movie, but I like the character of Red. And so the movie bends around, you know, Cage's desire to play that role in the movie, and ultimately, I think to the movie's benefit, you know.
Yeah, I saw that he had said that Panos actually like put the movie basically on hold while they argued about which role they were going to play. Eventually, Cage was able to convince him that there were parallels in the theming between Red and Cage's own life, especially when right before the movie started filming, Nick Cage's 14-year marriage to Alice Kim ended very abruptly, in his opinion. Mm-hmm. And he said that it was a real shocker and he didn't see it coming and that these feelings had to go somewhere. So they went into the performance. And I think that feeling of shock and abandonment definitely comes across in this performance. I think it's an amazing transference of real life emotion into the character.
Yeah, when I saw this in theaters, they played a Q&A with him and Panos afterwards, and for one, it was hilarious, and I'll tell you some of the things that Nick Cage said in it a little bit, but one of the things he said, I think, was also that the loss of his mother was like weighing very heavily on him, and is something that influenced this performance a lot, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I think that Panos had a similar thing where like both of them had recently lost their parents, and so when he was writing it, that was definitely part of what influenced him as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So one of the other things that Nick Cage said was at some point, whoever was interviewing them asked him like if there was a role that he had always wanted to play. And I swear to God, this is how he started answering that question. So they said, what role have you always wanted to play? And he started his answer by saying, well, I've always loved the ocean. As if he was about to say he's always wanted to play the ocean. He eventually gets to saying he wants to play Captain Ahab, basically. But he started the answer with, well, I've always loved the ocean.
Listen, as much as I could buy him as Captain Ahab, I would like to see Nick Cage as the ocean.
Are you kidding? Of course I would. I would watch him try and do anything. That's the other thing is, so like he refers to himself as the California Klaus Kinski now, and spends a lot of time in interviews recently talking about how he is really obsessed with like German expressionism. Mm-hmm. That's like his kind of favorite genre of movie. He loves like Metropolis and stuff like that.
We talked about M on this podcast, and it's a really amazing movie.
Yeah, well, and when you hear him talk about that, and then you think about his career and how people like to make fun of him for kind of like overacting in movies and stuff, and you go like, I mean, it is like a choice that he's making. Mm-hmm. It's like a decision he's made to perform in that manner, which made more sense when movies were silent. And we couldn't use things like dialogue to communicate emotions and stuff, you know?
Yeah.
But I also think is one of the things that makes him a remarkable special actor is that he does choose to still act in that manner, despite being in sometimes fairly grounded movies, although he's also capable of being like a more grounded actor, too.
Yeah, I agree. I saw that another one of his influences is kabuki theater from Japan, which again is very, over the top. It has these big drum beats behind it and face paint and stuff, and
very performative and gesture based, you know?
Yep. And I think that seeing both of those is very clear in a lot of his performances, although he is able to, like you say, turn it on and off.
I guess you could say these performances are still pretty performative, but they feel, I don't know, more restrained to me. But movies like Leaving Las Vegas and Adaptation, there's still big performative stuff going on there, but he is able to like ground characters in something too, you know?
Yeah.
Which I think actually is one of the things that he does very well in Color Out of Space. He actually grounds that father character in a way that makes the transformation into a more Cage-exploitation character all the more shocking, you know?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So definitely, in conclusion, this is a Cage performance, if ever there was one.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, when you get to the last hour of this movie, they fulfill the promise of the sort of Nicolas Cage revenge movie.
Absolutely.
Right?
And also, I mean, last thing before we move on from Nick Cage, but he really is incredible in this. And also, this came out right around the same time as Mom and Dad, which was another Nick Cage horror movie. So he was really dipping his feet into the genre, which, I love to see.
I love Mom and Dad. Yeah. Have you seen Mom and Dad?
Yeah, I have. It's a lot of fun.
It's a blast. I think that movie is super fun and actually has like kind of a nice little message at the end about parenting.
Mm-hmm. So there you go.
I quite like that movie.
Go check out Mom and Dad as well.
Yes, agreed.
And this movie was also dedicated to Icelandic composer Jóhann Jóhannsson, who died in February 2018.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. He did an incredible job on this. I mean, from minute one, that score kicks in, and there's like fun synths and stuff, and it's fast paced, and you know you're in for a ride.
I love this score. I own it on vinyl. It was like the first thing I bought from the movie as soon, because I think it was one of the first things that was available.
Right.
But I also just was seeing this on the big screen. That score is like so big and loud sometimes. It's like a sleep album basically.
Mm-hmm.
If this movie honestly feels like somebody just tried to take Dope Smoker and turn it into a movie. You know what I mean? And it has that kind of sound quality to it, but it also there's a beautiful melancholy to that score. That's always how I describe it. I have very melancholic feelings when I watch this movie, and a lot of that comes from the score. There's a real... You can tell that someone that was experiencing a lot of heartbreak wrote the music to this movie, I think, which, I do think unfortunately turned out to be like too true. You know?
I mean, not even just in the score, but the way that they utilize the song that plays over the titles as well, King Crimson's Starless. I mean,
dude, yes,
so moody. It's playing over this pan over the top of forest with this dusky color, like. God, incredible way to set the tone when they open it up.
You know what my favorite thing about that opening is just before the actual King Crimson song starts, there is the sound of swirling electric guitars for just like 5 to 6 seconds. And when I say that, I mean like someone just sort of noodling really fast.
Right.
Like it's just like this tip of the hat to like, this is the most metal movie you're about to, you know what I mean? Like you're about to dive into some heavy metal shit.
Yeah.
And then that breaks into the opening of that King Crimson song and sort of reveals itself to be like, again, like more melancholy and heartbreaking than the promise of just that heavy metal sort of opening,
Definitely.
Which I love. I love the marriage of those things. It seems impossible that it would work as well as it does.
It also blends that sort of imagery of music and death that we're going to be getting with the text that appears at the very beginning as well. When I die, bury me deep, lay 2 speakers at my feet, wrap some headphones around my head, and rock and roll me when I'm dead. This is not confirmed by Panos, but it appears to be a reference to the last words of Douglas Roberts, a man who was executed on 4/20/2005, and it's pretty metal.
Yeah, it is pretty metal. Pretty metal date to be sentenced to death, to be honest. Like right off the bat, yeah.
And so, like I said, we get this panning over the forest, and we see Nick Cage, who, as we said, plays Red Miller, a logger near the Shadow Mountains, which is East California near the Mojave Desert, which I did not know. I had to look that up.
Me neither. It's got a very nice, and they use the title cards, I believe, specifically for this reason to give you this feeling, but it has the feeling of like a J.R.R. Tolkien location, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The Shadow Mountains, 1983 A.D. It sort of, again, tips its hat to like, this is a D&D heavy metal campaign, basically, about heartbreak.
Yeah, and in addition to being like full of stars and the way that it's written feeling like a book, the way that it kind of intersects the movie into, it feels like chapters basically.
Yeah.
So it gives it the feeling of sort of a pulpy novel that you might be reading, like Mandy herself is reading at points in the book or in the movie.
Yes, Seeker of the Serpent's Eye, is that what the book is called?
Something like that. So they live near the Mojave, and he's there with his girlfriend, artist Mandy Bloom, and they live in a cabin near Crystal Lake. So
yes. You know what's funny is, it was only when I watched it yesterday that caught my ear the way it's supposed to.
Oh, really?
Every other time I watched it, I heard it as just, Crystal Lake and the Shadow Mountains. Like, he's just trying to give me this fantasy movie feeling, right? Mm-hmm. And then I'm watching it last night. I'm like, no, that's a fucking Friday the 13th reference. Yeah. Of course that's what that is.
Yeah, so I was pleased to hear that. And Mandy is an artist who does this like crazy fantasy art, very Dungeons and Dragons-esque, as you made reference to. Although she does have a day job as a cashier at a nearby gas station, which is not quite as glamorous, but you got to make the ends meet.
Well, and watching it last night when the Friday the 13th reference finally clicked, I realized that her sort of job is like she has an encounter with the Doomsayer at the gas station at Crystal Lake. You know what I mean? That's like essentially what that scene later in the movie is. Sure.
Plus, I mean, doing it at a gas station is pretty much a trope in and of itself. Between Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Cabin in the Woods making reference to it.
Yep. Exactly.
So all kinds of stuff there. And we do get to see some of her artwork, which is very cool. And
It is cool.
This is intercut with Red driving home while
Yes.
a speech from Reagan plays over the radio.
Yeah, but a return to family values?
A spiritual awakening and the return to the bedrock of traditional values.
Yeah.
And Red turns it off. And I think that we really start to get like a picture of who Red is, not only from him turning it off, but I think that back to basics, works with his hands, lives in the middle of nowhere, and as we know, is on the cusp of an awakening, albeit one that he won't enjoy very much.
Well, and so here's a thing that, and I'm excited that we're going to do this beat by beat, because I think I can maybe work with you to sort of play out this idea I had about the movie, rewatching it recently. There is a really quick shot where he gets on like a helicopter to be like lifted out of where they're cutting down trees, right?
Yeah, logging.
Right? And a guy tries to hand him a beer, and he waves it off. And I actually get the impression just from that little moment, and then a moment we'll get to a little later in the movie, that I think one of the unspoken things in this movie is that he and Mandy might be in like recovery together and have sort of like run off together from like a past life of perhaps like more problems.
Yeah.
I kind of get the impression that they've like absconded to this very small life out in the woods from something potentially worse or more troubled.
Yeah, I definitely get hints of sort of like recovering alcoholic, especially from him. It's obvious that Mandy has severe trauma. I mean, she jumps like 5 feet when Red says knock, knock from the doorway. She has a big old scar on her face. She tells this story about her dad, who was clearly psychotic.
Killing the starlings. But you know what's interesting about that story too? Well, and we'll get there, I guess. But one of the things that's always interesting to me about that story is the way she tells it. It's like that thing where it's like it's so normalized in some weird way in America for like, I don't know, like a blue collar dad to just be like a little bit mean and a little bit violent and to sort of. I don't know, even that idea of like, I got the neighborhood boys together and showed them how to kill an animal, you know, like, I don't know, there's something weirdly normalized about that in America, and I think that scene is very much about how obviously sick and abnormal that actually is, and how weird it is to live in a country where we normalize things like that. I think there's a lot of that like running underneath this movie.
And also I think that there's a little bit of questioning about confronting our own role in that.
Yeah.
The way that she hesitates when he asks her what she did, it makes me feel like I'm not positive that she tells him the truth about running away.
Well, and I also think even if her answer is true, you know, she ran away.
Right, instead of stopping people.
She didn't stop it. She ran away. And not that I blame her for doing that necessarily, but it is an interesting... I think the movie lets that moment hang for exactly that reason, for us to sort of think about that response.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's kind of why I get the impression that they may have run away together to this place. That story is one of the reasons I kind of think... I think she may be relating something there that we're meant to take more out of than just that story, you know?
Sure. She also reveals that her favorite planet is Jupiter. And and Nick says that his is Saturn before switching it to Galactus. Shout out to my X-Men adjacent fans.
That's right. That's right.
What's your favorite planet?
My favorite planet. Boy, I can't believe I didn't expect you to ask me this question. God,
it's
I don't
always
know,
the
man.
Simple ones.
Yeah, probably Mars, just because there's been so many cool like movies and stories set in on or around Mars.
Sure. I think that mine is probably Saturn because I think the rings are neat.
They are neat. You know what? I can agree with that.
This is not the only time, or it's not the first time that this is noticeable, but the lighting and colors in this movie are just incredible and vivid. I mean, the normal scenes pop like crazy. Like, there's some great colors going on when things are ostensibly normal, but on top of that, they use these non-diegetic giallo type deep reds and blues to highlight important stuff and create drama, and it's really spectacular. Plus they do these like swirling sky moments.
Love it.
It's just really incredible. What do you think about this non-diegetic color? Like, do you think that it takes you out of it, or is this something you enjoy?
Oh no, well, I love it. So, and I don't know if anybody that is listening to this podcast is familiar with me in the first place, but I write about Pop-Tarts a lot, which is going to sound weird, but I'll explain it. You know, Wild Berry Pop-Tarts, they're like the blue and purple frosting, right? That is my favorite movie aesthetic. is any movie that looks like a wild berry Pop-Tart, which there's a ton of. The most famous example recently is probably that shot in Blade Runner 2049 when he's looking up at the big hologram of Joy.
Right.
And it's like super pink and purple and stuff. Color Out of Space is a very Pop-Tarty movie. The John Wick movies get very Pop-Tarty at different times. Mandy definitely has a Pop-Tart aesthetic to some extent. Giallo movies in general, I think of as very Pop-Tarty. So anyway, I have an obsession with that sort of like visual aesthetic. So this is like right up my alley. It does not take me out of it at all. I really love the way, again, that sort of allows me to get in tune with like this movie's vibe, right? Which I think you need to. This movie is working on frequencies. It's not working on stories and narratives and stuff, And I think things like those sort of, as you're referring to it, like non-diegetic color schemes, like help with that, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think that instead of taking it out, it actually helps to pull you more into the world of Mandy.
Yeah. Well, and it also, I think in Mandy in particular, because eventually you get to those like really non-diegetic things like these strobing green lights on some of the objects and stuff. And I think, in my opinion, Panos wants me to be like, well, why the fuck are you doing that? Like, what is that? Like, you're imbuing that object with some kind of power. Why? To who? Like, what does that mean? You know? And I really like that. And I like that the movie does not necessarily offer me like direct answers either, that it just lets that stuff out there for me to sort of kind of chew on and gnaw on a little bit.
Just a little bit of emphasis on it, not a direct answer.
Yeah.
So on her way to work, Mandy is walking past to go to this gas station, and it's this really incredible like ethereal moment full of slow-mo and red light and shifting focus. And Mandy walks past this van carrying the Children of the New Dawn, which is a hippie cult.
The coolest fucking title for like the dumbest fucks in the world.
And they're led by a real Charlie Manson type, Jeremiah San.
What a fucking hilarious character. I mean, also terrifying, but like a hilarious character. He's such a slimy piece of shit, and also like that version of a man where he's so openly pathetic.
Right. And he's struck by Mandy's beauty, and he orders one of his disciples, Brother Swan, to kidnap Mandy. And he's like, Brother Swan, do you have the horn of Abraxas?
Yes. Oh, I love it. And then he pulls that out of the bag, and that's the first. I think that's the first instance of that like green strobing light, right?
Yeah, it is, and it's this stone ocarina. Like it's fucking dope.
Yep, it's a fucking Zelda prop. It's like I love, I feel like you can just feel Panos is like, he's a child of the '80s like we are, and it's all over it. You know?
And the thing that really helps, I think, is that if they had even smirked a little bit when they pulled it out, this whole movie would have just fallen apart. But the fact that they take it completely seriously and they're like, yes, the horn of Abraxas. You're like, all right, I get it. We're in here.
Dude, I agree. I mean, I think this is one of those movies where one of the things I love about this movie is like the first time I saw it, and maybe even the second time I saw it, it was like a very funny cage exploitation movie to me to some extent, But now when I watch it, like I almost don't. I do still find it like funny and entertaining and stuff, but it's like such a sad masterpiece to me now, and because there's so much of both of those things going on throughout it. But that is good. I do love that, like within the context of this movie, all of these characters are taking things like the Horn of Abraxas very seriously.
Yeah.
But in an hour, we will tear some of that reality down, which I love too.
Right.
Like where we'll just be like, yeah, these are just fucking acid freaks that have like totally lost their mind. You know what I mean? Like they'll destroy some of the mysticism around this within the context of the movie too, which I think is so interesting and kind of part of what I love about the movie.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the green light is for ultimately. Like if we want to break that down, like I kind of think it's just like, look, these people imbue these objects with power. They are silly, stupid things that mean nothing.
Right.
But these people believe them to have power, so for them, they have power.
Right. It's just an instrument at the end of the day, but they give it a dumb name like the Horn of Abraxas, and they use it to summon these insane demonic biker gangs, and all of a sudden, it's the Horn of Abraxas.
Yes. Yep. And it's like, and then, I think the movie is maybe walking a little bit of this line too of like, so at the end of the day, then what's the difference? Like whether you think it's actually got some sort of supernatural power or not.
Whoa, man.
It does. Yeah. I mean, it does summon these fucking demon bikers that murder a lady. Like so what's the fucking difference?
It sure does, and that's exactly what they do. They go out to the lake. Brother Swan, let me say, this guy is creepy as hell, man. He's got like slow lizard blinks.
one of the like quiet great performances in the movie, I think.
Yeah, and he uses that horn and the sacrifice of another cult member to get the help of the Black Skulls, a demonic biker gang with a taste for human flesh and a highly potent liquid form of LSD. And let's talk about these Black Skulls, man. We got
Yes, please.
spiky arms and blood on face guy.
Yep.
We got spiky armor guy. We got high collar and fucked up mouth guy.
Yeah.
And the covered face and claws guy. And oh boy, I saw someone refer to them as Cenobikers, and I think that that's a really great phrase for it, because they really have fully embodied this sort of Hellraiser aesthetic into their person.
Yeah, I mean, when this movie came out, there was a big call for, hey, if you're going to do a Hellraiser reboot, like, hire Panos Cosmatos. And I think it's definitely because he just so very clearly took inspiration from that movie and the design of those characters, you know?
Yeah.
Which I love. I love these characters. I love the way they're introduced, again, with some of these, like, really deep red lights and stuff. These sounds they make, too. There's just the sort of roaring sound of the engines that they pull up on and stuff. The way Panos kind of treats the like all-terrain vehicles that they drive up on as their steeds, you know?
Yeah.
It's really cool.
They sound like growling, like the motors. It's very cool.
Yeah, that's very George Miller in particular, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Some of that stuff.
And we got to the bottom of your favorite planet. Do you have a favorite Black Skull motorcycle gang member?
Ooh. Hold on. I got to think about how to answer this question, because I need to not mistakenly answer the knife dick guy. I have to make sure I don't mistakenly choose that one. I probably, whichever one he beheads and then lights a cigarette on fire with, that's probably my favorite one, just because I love that moment.
That's a really good one. I am partial to spiky armor guy because I think he looks the silliest.
Yes, yeah, for sure. I believe he's also the first one he ends up killing, right?
Yeah, he gets shot off the bike, and but he does knock the car out, so he at least gets some revenge.
Oh, yeah, that's true, yeah.
In the meantime, the Black Skulls are indeed willing to kidnap this couple, and so they break in and they subdue Mandy and Red, and they bring them to the cult compound.
Yeah. Can we talk about that abduction scene really quick?
Sure.
Because I think that is one of the like really, really sort of impactful visual moments in the movie. It's done with a lot of strobe lights, but it's also the editing in that scene is pretty incredible, I think.
Yeah.
Where sometimes the strobe effect is used as a cut between shots, and other times it is just a natural strobe within the same shot.
Right.
And I think that it is edited in a particular way where that in and of itself becomes very unsettling, and it becomes hard to know what you might see next, and that becomes kind of frightening in its own way, you know?
Yeah, and that strobe comes back pretty frequently in some of the later scenes too.
Yes, it does, actually. Yeah, you're right. I didn't even think about that, actually, that does kind of, that's like a repeated imagery later in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just think that scene is, like, striking, and also one of the more sort of heightened horror moments in the movie, too.
I mean, in terms of a mini home invasion movie, it's intense as hell.
Yeah, it is.
So they take them to the compound, and the two women in the cult, Mother Marlene and Sister Lucy, wake Mandy up. She's tied to the kitchen table. And it's obvious that Marlene has some sort of resentment, some level of resentment and jealousy about Sand's infatuation with her.
One of the things I like about this movie is the way these character dynamics are sort of set up and drawn within the movie, where, again, like a lot is conveyed without them actually particularly saying what they mean.
Right.
The earlier scene with Mother Marlene, is that her name?
Right.
The earlier scene, like when Jeremiah ultimately asks Brother Swan to kidnap the people, that starts with him speaking with Mother Marlene, right? That's who he speaks to first.
Yep.
But he ultimately just sort of is like frustrated by her and annoyed by her.
Yeah.
And so there's definitely, they set up this kind of idea that like he's a very Charlie Manson guy, right? Where it's like he goes through all these different women, different ones are sort of special to him at different times, so they then latch on to him and sort of grow to resent him but still desire his approval, like all of that kind of stuff. That really, really fucked up sort of like male manipulation shit, you know?
Yeah, sure. I mean, later on when she talks about how he told me I'm the most sensual lover he's ever known and stuff, like, you know, that sort of, it's like the Dennis system from Always Sunny. Like,
Well, and you can see that she has a real jealousy of Sister Lucy. Is that how they refer to her, Sister Lucy? You can see that she has a real jealousy of her. You can see that Sister Lucy has probably been the victim of kidnapping, where Mother Marlene seems to more just actually be into Jeremiah, right? That's the impression I get anyway. The younger woman seems to be more traumatized by this.
Yeah, she does the Russian roulette thing, but she definitely seems more like deer in headlights.
Yeah, well, and the Russian roulette thing, I really think she connects with Red in that moment, and Red realizes that she was Mandy in the past.
Right, and that's why he,
for these people, that's why he
spoiler
spares her
alert.
later. Yeah, I think that's what's going on there. I think we're meant to think that she has been kidnapped and traumatized by this, and is just, she's not drinking the juice. She's been forced into that, right?
Right.
But so then you have Mother Marlene, who has this like extreme jealousy of this younger woman that Jeremiah really just uses as like a sex slave almost, you know?
Right.
I really like the way the movie is able to illustrate a lot of those dynamics without having to have anybody explicate any of this.
Yeah, it is really incredible the way that they do that, and I think that a lot of that is to the actors' credit as well.
Absolutely. The cast in this is phenomenal. Like, when you were saying before that it's like this is very much a Nick Cage movie, I fully agree with that and know what you mean by that. But I also would not want to discredit any of the other performers in this movie, because everybody is really turning in some like phenomenal work throughout this.
It's in this moment where they are drugging Mandy with LSD and venom from a giant black wasp that I am upset to know exists.
Oh God, dude, that might actually be the most horrific moment in the movie.
It's awful, and she just is so deliciously into it, being like, I call this the cherry on top. It's a really great performance, and
it's
they
so
do
good,
great.
yeah. And again, it's like I believe that all plays into this dynamic she has with Jeremiah, where she's aware that she's had to kidnap this woman because Jeremiah is into her, and that means he's not as into Mother Marley, you know, like all that stuff. So she's taking pleasure in this light torture of this woman.
And so Sand is a failed musician, and he says that he's a better version of the Carpenters, which is laughable.
Do you like the Carpenters?
I also think, though, that it's very interesting that, obviously, I think there's a pretty direct correlation between the Carpenters and Jesus, a carpenter. And so, you know, when he talks later about how he's God and how God speaks to him and told him to take anything he wants, there's definitely a certain element of, I'm bigger than Jesus.
Well, one of the things I like about Jeremiah as a character is, as I said, he's like very funny in how openly pathetic he is. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways in which he's openly pathetic is he is one of the only characters that explicates things all the time, but it's because what he's explicating are his insane rationale for why he's able to behave the way he does.
Right, and this resentment that he has.
Yes, he's clearly a person that is, I think to some extent, feels the weight of the guilt that must come with living a life like he does, and so is constantly like saying out loud to everyone, no, I'm allowed to do this because I have been granted permission by, you know, he's like, he's rationalizing for himself more than anybody else, right?
Yeah.
And it's very interesting to watch him so pathetically have to constantly remind himself and the room out loud that he's been granted permission to, you know.
Yeah, and so he tries to seduce Mandy with his psychedelic folk music playing in the background.
Oh my God. This is maybe the scene of any movie this decade.
It's incredible.
This scene is incredible. It is at once abhorrently horrifying and so fucking hilarious in how pathetic this guy is, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it does that really interesting swing where, like you said, he's talking about how God has told him to take anything he wanted, but it's this really freaky long shot on his face where her face is slowly overlaid on top of his while he's talking.
As if they're like morphing into one another in some way or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean the shot where like if you look at their mouth, it's like moving and not moving at the same time because it's the two faces overlaid on them.
It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Like because it is such a simple trick, really, right? But done in such a precise way that gives it this crazy psychedelic effect and just again brings you into the sort of feeling, the experience of this moment for these characters, you know?
Right, there's that. I mean, there's also the like image trails and after images as they walk around the room, and he's trying to, like, he gives her this huge speech, And Mandy just laughs in his face. She ridicules him while he's standing there hanging dong for everyone to see.
Yep. I mean, that is, when I said this is the scene of the decade, that is pretty much precisely what I meant. Like that moment.
Yeah.
Where she just cackles in the face of this just unchecked, unbridled, entitled male ego.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's that adage of, like, I forget exactly how it goes. What is it? Like, there's some adage like that about, like, any woman that's ever laughed in the face of a man has wound up dead, something to that effect.
Right.
And I think that is such a brilliant illustration of that unfortunate fact in reality about women's lives.
He is entirely unimpressive, and, she laughs at him, and he's surrounded himself with this cult to the point where this is a murderable offense that she laughs at him, that she doesn't just accept him and agree that he deserves her. She doesn't owe him anything, and so when she laughs at him, he flips out. He starts screaming at people not to look at him, members of his own cult and everything.
She fully damages his ego, right? Like he is drank his own juice so much that he feels comfortable like stripping naked in front of this woman only to be laughed at. It's like his ego is so inflated and then so quickly deflated,
Yeah.
just by the laughter of this woman. And it's like, it's such a powerful image to me. Man, do I love that moment.
It's really great. And in his rage, Sand stabs Red, who's tied and gagged with barbed wire, which is fucked up.
Yes, but also he uses, I forget what they refer to it as, but that knife that...
it's like the tainted blade of some abyssal lair. It's a D&D weapon.
Yes, exactly. And they do the green light thing again on it, again, because for these people, there is power in this object. And then he stabs Red with it, and it's that thing of like, this is just a fucking prop knife. Like, for sure that's what that is. They bought that at a gaming store somewhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But Jeremiah has given it a name and a history and convinced these people that this is this powerful object. And then in using it to stab Red, like, it has power, right? It's still a knife that fucking stabs a guy. And
he again intertwines it with this Christian imagery of he talks about Jesus and also stabs Red in the ribs, like where Jesus was supposedly pierced by the spear and whatnot.
Yep.
So really, this interesting blend of sort of that Dungeons and Dragons quote unquote demonic influence and this hyper religious imagery that he's utilizing from more mainstream religion is really interesting.
Well, sure. I mean, to some extent, it's like, think about the satanic panic of the 80s and how things like D&D were actually like wrapped up in that for some stupid reason, right? Parents being afraid that D&D had something to do with Satan or whatever. When the reality is the true monsters are these like sort of Christian cults, basically. And this movie is just sort of like very on the nose, being like, yeah, I mean, the real monsters of the world are these freaks, these Jesus freaks.
Right, the fundamentalists who, when things don't go their way, burn people alive and tie them up in barbed wire.
Yeah.
Like I alluded to, they also burn Mandy alive in front of Red. And, boy, this scene is really fucked up. It's very intense. The different reactions of all the cult members is fascinating as it, like, hits each of their faces as she burns. Really intense stuff. And after nothing but ash remains of Mandy, Sand and his group leave, and the rage on Nick Cage's face is just so intense, even through this barbed wire gag.
Yeah.
Like his eyes, there's just so much pain in his eyes.
Dude, I mean, this is the thing where it's like, the next hour of this movie is about to become the like revenge exploitation movie you want it to be,
Yeah.
But it is so grounded in this first hour that certainly has a lot of like very expressive over the top moments and stuff, but is really about Mandy. Like Mandy is very much the focus and central force of the first hour. Red kind of takes over the movie, obviously, in the second hour. I do think there's an argument to be made that it's like, oh, great, same old revenge story, like a woman's got to die for a man to be motivated to like do a thing or whatever, right? And I can hear that criticism with this movie, and I think is a sensible criticism of this movie.
Yeah, definitely valid.
I also think very few vengeance movies do I feel the specter of that loss like I do in Mandy through every second of the proceedings that follow.
Right.
And I think a lot of that is because of how it gets grounded in this particular scene through Cage's performance, you know?
Yeah.
This is grounded. This isn't the full rage Cage that we love and are going to get, you know?
Right.
This is really some I don't know, there's something real happening in this scene that comes through there, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's interesting in that two of, I think, the more interesting examples of this sort of worn out trope of a woman dying to motivate a man are the John Wick franchise, which you mentioned earlier, and this movie. And I think that they really are opposite sides of the same coin, where, first of all, Keanu Reeves has experienced a lot of loss in his life as well.
Yeah.
And so I think that he's also drawing from a lot of real life stuff. But
Yeah.
where John Wick is very cold and impassionate in his murder spree, this Nick Cage performance as Red, you know, obviously beyond the symbolic implications of his name, it's pure passion, it's pure fire in this performance. And I think that you, like you said, you see that here.
Yeah, I think it's on full display here, and I think were it not for this scene, the rest of the movie maybe would become just pure exploitation silliness, right?
Yeah.
But I think this kind of grounds a lot of that in a pretty special way.
Yeah, and so he frees himself, he mourns over her ashes, and he goes inside, falls asleep, exhausted and in shock. And this is when we meet a horror icon for a new age, the Cheddar Goblin.
I was like, please don't blow by Cheddar Goblin. How are you going to leave Cheddar
I
Goblin?
Would never. Cheddar Goblin, a goblin who vomits what is essentially Easy Mac onto his victims / beneficiaries. 60% more cheese. Number 1 3 years in a row. It's goblin good. Come on.
Uncle Ched, I love this guy. Man, do I love this sequence. When I saw this in theaters, this was kind of, you know, the movie is very somber, I would say, up to this point. And this is when it really goes into like full overdrive and becomes the heavy metal movie that you want it to be. I know that sounds weird to say that the Cheddar Goblin sequence is where that starts, but it kind of is, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think in the sad tragedy that I do think this movie ultimately is, I'm gonna keep hammering that home. That like as much as it's fun, it's also this great tragedy. What I love about this scene is like he literally crashes out, right? Like this horrible thing has just happened to him, and then he walks in to just see like ultimate capitalism on display, basically. You know what I mean? Like that there's no mourning for what has happened. The world is still moving on in its disgusting capitalist ways, which are sort of illustrated here through just like literally the mascot is barfing its product onto children, you know?
Absolutely. I think that absurdist nature is part of what makes this, in addition to the surreal moments, part of why I feel like this definitely falls into that Greek weird movement.
Yeah, for sure. Because this is like this feels like it's out of like the Too Many Cooks sketch, you know?
Right. Well, yeah. So it was directed by Casper Kelly, this commercial, who made the Too Many Cooks short for Adult Swim.
Of course. All right. So that makes sense. Yes, I totally get the feel of that off of it.
There you go. Perfect. Mission accomplished, Casper.
Yeah, of course. Which feels like it should be outside the tone of this movie, but I think it's not, because of how it does kind of fit into this weird tragedy that is still here within these weird frames, right?
Right. And I mean, it also, the way that it segues into this nightmare that Red has, where it's animated and it's the flesh rotting off of Mandy's skin. I mean, I don't want to say like, oh yeah, that's the kind of shit you see on Adult Swim, but it does necessarily feel like it could be there. It could be on Adult Swim.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so that sort of transition, I think, definitely works. And he wakes up from this nightmare, which certainly would be additionally traumatizing.
Yeah.
He puts back / disinfects his wounds with a bottle of vodka.
Yes, which he pulls from like behind a bathroom sink. This is where I also think that we are meant to. I think he's sort of subtly giving us clues that Red is a recovering alcoholic, and I think that's one of those clues is that he pulls that from. He's hidden that from himself for just such an emergency, basically.
Yeah, and I mean the way that he puts it back by rubbing his throat,
grabbing his throat. Yeah,
certainly experienced to say the least.
And this big camera move is one of my favorites in the movie too, where it's this very wide shot of what I assume is a set, but like a bathroom, right? And as he chugs more, the camera kind of swoops in on him in this interesting way, and also kind of like tilts back and forth a little with like kind of its own feeling of almost like drunkenness, you know?
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite camera moves in the movie just because I think it's like so evocative of what is going on with Cage's character and his performance. Like the camera is sort of doing a dance with him in his performance. I really love that.
Yeah, and I mean, he's howling in agony, grief, rage,
Oh, yeah.
all of these emotions that
Yeah.
are, coursing through him, and you really feel it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is like some award-worthy Cage stuff.
Yeah.
You know, these particular scenes of him kind of letting out the rage of what's happened.
He dresses his wounds, and he goes to fetch the Reaper. Again, it's interesting that this sort of tactic of giving things a name to imbue it with power is not something that's only utilized by the cult.
Correct.
Which is really interesting.
And in going to retrieve this thing and knowing what it's called already and seeming to know the purpose of its use.
Very quest-like.
Yeah, well, also Bill Duke says, like, I never thought I'd see you back here or something like that. Like, there is an implication of a past of Reds here, I think, that I don't totally understand, but I get the impression this man has a violent past of some kind that this has driven him to return to.
His Bill Duke is doing a great job here. He's his friend Carruthers, and he provides him with these freshly crafted arrows and a warning about his odds and information about the Black Skull. Very quest giver,
absolutely,
sort of tactics here. And according to Carruthers, the Black Skulls. This is the moment, like you said, where they sort of break down this mythology where. He says that the Black Skulls were just drug couriers who turned murderously sadomasochistic after they got drugged by a bad batch of LSD. And so you said you like that they get like an actual backstory like this?
I do, because to me what is interesting about this movie is the depiction of Jeremiah is that he has created a mythology that he uses as like a rationale for his behavior, and in doing so creates a cult, basically. Like, people sort of follow along with that, right? But then within that movie we also have people that go like, yeah, but that's still all bullshit. Like that, like we have people calling the bullshit of that this movie is not so much a fantasy film that it believes any of what Jeremiah is delivering, right? It's all bullshit, including these Black Skulls who really are just fucking fucked up acid freaks. You know?
Absolutely.
Like, I like that idea that, like, it demystifies the occultism of Christianity, in my mind, is one of the things that's happening there.
I will say that I didn't like it the first time that I watched the movie, but coming back to it and really understanding it, like you said, the first two times I watched it sort of as an exploitation movie, and then being able to come back to it with more of a critical eye, I think it is a really interesting choice, and I think that the deliberate nature of it really forces you to read into it in that way.
Yeah, I mean, because in my opinion, I don't think it ultimately destroys the sort of fantasy elements of the movie, while at the same time is pretty specifically doing that, right? Like, I am still able to buy into this as a fantasy story if I want to, but I also like that I could also read, it's like The Blair Witch is actually a good example of this, of a movie where it's like, is it supernatural? Maybe. Is it not? Maybe. That's the best answer I have for you. Maybe it's all supernatural. Maybe it's not. And I kind of like that this movie is able to walk that line.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really cool. Red, he sets off on his quest, basically. He forges a battle axe.
Dude, I mean, such a great fucking scene.
Yeah.
The probably the best musical cue in the movie, too.
And it's insanely cool. And, I mean, not only are we getting cool music here, this is 75 minutes in. We finally get the title card of the movie.
Yes.
Really cool differentiator. It's this elaborate metal-ass logo with, spiraling veins off of the word Mandy. And, it's really cool. And, we've seen movies do title cards at the end, like right at the very end before. But kind of breaking up the movie this way, I think, is really interesting and relatively unique. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that does something like this.
Maybe somebody would immediately go like, well, Tarantino, he's got the chapter breaks and stuff like right? Like we've certainly seen chapter breaks, but what's so interesting about this is that, like, you think they're chapter breaks initially because you sort of get two different titles that are not the title of the movie, but then one of them just is the title of the movie, and it's 75 minutes into the movie, and you sort of realize, like, well, okay, so I guess they're not chapter cards. I don't know. It is unique in that way where it's like it does just drop its title about halfway through the movie.
Yeah.
And makes me wonder if mayhaps is that like the name that he's given his battle axe, and that's why it comes at this particular moment.
Right. It's certainly, at the very least, it's done in her honor, and sort of the dedication. It's cool stuff. And he sets off. He tracks the bikers. He shoots one with his crossbow, which, like I said, this is spiky armor man.
Yep.
And he tries to run him down, but his car goes off the road because spiky armor man shoots him, or like shoots the car with a shotgun. And
well, he's a big bulky dude too, right?
Sure.
I get the impression he just straight up drove that car onto his armor and it flipped over.
I mean, that's certainly possible as well. He's a big guy, and while it's true that they are just like fucked up people, it does seem on some level that they're like buying into their own mythology, and they have some level of superhuman strength. Like, it feels like they did sort of get transformed, even if it's just because of their own sort of placebo effect of buying into it.
Totally agree with that. And that's kind of what I mean about like the way this walks between fantasy and not, you know, where it's like I could kind of buy into either explanation of these guys, you know.
His car goes off the road. He gets taken to their hideout, and Red manages to break the pipe that he's cuffed to and kill the biker who is beating him up. And while he was searching their hideout, he comes across another biker who was watching porn and doing coke while wearing the razor strap-on from Seven.
Yes. Yep. And there's like a really disturbing shot of a victim of that as well as Red is making his escape. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fucked up.
Yes. Fucked up leads to a really pretty awesome fight scene, though.
Oh, yeah. He tries to take him out all stealthy-like.
Yes.
But it winds up being another straight-up brawl. And when the razor strap-on gets stuck in the floor, it leaves this guy's throat wide open for a box cuttering.
Oh my god, yeah. And then just like this to me is the first like really big Crazy Cage moment when he just like gets the blood in his face and kind of like screams and smiles through it.
Yeah.
But there's also that great line a few minutes before where when he's still strapped to the thing, and the guy like cuts his shirt and he goes, "That was my favorite shirt."
Yeah, well, so that line had never really stuck out to me until I was watching at the very end, which we're going to jump ahead a little bit here.
Yeah.
When he's like flashing back to the first moment that him and Mandy met. That's the shirt that he's wearing.
Yes, in fact, this shirt is worn by both characters multiple times throughout the movie.
Yeah.
There are also scenes earlier in the movie where Mandy is wearing that shirt, and so it's like, you know, that thing where your girl is wearing your favorite shirt, and that's part of what makes it your favorite shirt. Is like sometimes she goes to bed in it or whatever, you know. Like, again, it's another object that has like meaning and power.
It works in two ways. Where it does work is kind of just like, oh, it's a silly line for him to say, and ha, Nick Cage. But also, it like genuinely lends a lot of character to this moment. And
I agree. Like I wrote a review of this movie for cinema76.com, one of the sites that I write for, last year at some point. And one of the things I said is that like the sort of cage exploitation movie here is actually like a big Trojan horse, I think. Mm-hmm. And I imagine Panos would be like delighted to hear that people are coming around to this. That like I do think he probably enjoys the cage exploitation movie he made and is happy to deliver that for us. There's obviously some joy taken in a lot of those moments, but I do think it's sort of a Trojan horse for more of the tragedy that's actually underlining almost every one of those moments, you know?
Yeah, it is, I will say, a gleeful Trojan horse, though, because he continues by breaking the neck of another biker and doing a mountain of cocaine.
Yes. It's got that great snap zoom in on his face when he breaks that guy's neck.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, and he goes into like a martial arts pose, and it's fantastic, and
it's amazing.
He finds his axe and he does some of their tainted LSD, and it causes him to instantly and severely hallucinate.
Yes, it does.
His face literally melts.
Seems to affect the proceedings of every minute of the movie after that as well.
Right, because he envisions a radio tower.
Yes.
And he seeks it out. He finds the chemist there.
Correct.
A mysterious drug manufacturer who tells him where to find the cult.
Yeah.
And there's a tiger, too. Her name is Lizzie.
Yes. I love this scene where Cage says absolutely nothing, but the chemist sort of intuits.
It, man.
Yeah. He's like, "Oh, you're so right, man." And then he lets Lizzie go, you know?
Yeah.
But then he has that great line where he says, what does he say to him? He says, "You exude a cosmic darkness.
Oh, yeah.
Do you see it?"
Oh,
he
yeah.
asks him if he recognizes that there is this cosmic darkness to him.
And we get to see it manifest when he looks down at his feet and he's got these thick black millipedes or whatever they are going buck wild at his feet. It's disgusting.
Yes. And so I don't want to jump ahead of myself too much, but I do have kind of a little bit of a theory about maybe what this movie is like about, and I think that line is of particular importance to it. So keep it in the back of your mind, and we'll circle back on this as we get deeper into the movie.
Also, just a little fun fact. Lizzie was called Lizzie because it was supposed to be a lizard up until he arrived on set, and Panos said, "Surprise, it's a tiger now."
Wait, what?
I thought that was absolutely hysterical, and they said that it was a delight to work with, but that was a shock to be certain.
That is so funny.
And so he's still on the hunt now that he's gotten this other clue, and so Red he rests one last time. He gets another crazy animated dream, and after he wakes up, he heads to their makeshift wooden church that's like in the middle of a quarry, and Red kills Brother Swan in this just absolutely brutal way, where Swan is taunting him, and Red just shuts him up with the point of the axe and just like leans on it, puts his weight on it until blood just erupts from Swan.
He just like drives it into his esophagus. It's
gross.
Crazy. Yeah, another scene that I just fucking love. I like that when this movie decides it's going to be gory and heavy metal, it's metal as fuck.
Oh, yeah. I mean, even the next couple kills, we get a sick axe throw that kills the character Hanker.
I keep saying my favorite thing in the movie. It's definitely one of my favorite things in the movie. Because it just happens so fast, too.
It does. It comes out of nowhere. And get ready for one of my favorite things in the movie. He fights Brother Klopek in a chainsaw duel, the likes of which hasn't been seen since Dennis Hopper in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Totally agreed. Definitely what it's a reference to, and absolutely delightful to watch. I love the way that scene is like lit. It's like these silhouettes with these big chainsaws. Like,
yeah, but the one chainsaw is enormous.
It's so... Yeah, I mean, if you had a doubt about whether this movie was about unchecked, unchallenged masculinity and the way dudes with tiny penises need to, like, control a bunch of stuff to feel better about themselves, like, it's all right there in that image.
Yeah, I really do think that it sums things up pretty accurately.
Yeah.
And Nick, like we said, Red spares the life of Sister Lucy.
Yes.
And he goes through the tunnels under the church, and he finds Mother Marlene.
Ooh, I wanna stop you really quick, because one of my favorite images in the movie, and this is just a thing I love in movies, is the church itself. Mm-hmm. I love triangles in movies.
Oh, yeah.
Don't really know why, but I just like seeing triangle designs in movies.
It's the most powerful shape.
Is that true?
In terms of stability, yeah.
Yep. Pythagorean theorem. I know math. I love the way triangles look. I especially like them when they're used with like religious imagery, because I think there's something very, I don't know, like culty built into triangles for some reason, you know? And there's like this great shot of like a very like sort of pink light coming through the cross and that is within a triangle. It's just like all of my favorite shit in like one image in a movie, you know?
And so Mother Marlene is down there in the tunnels, and
yes,
she gives this speech about how, would you believe I was quite beautiful once, and and how she was once the favorite, and how things change. But I lick at the rock hard waves. And it's like, yep. All right, Mother Marlene.
she says, I anticipate my lover's every move.
She's going for it, and Red is not having it. He decapitates her after she tries to seduce him.
Wait, but I love the way Panos delivers this information to us, which is we've just seen a bunch of violent deaths for each of these people. We see her try and seduce Red. We know Red's not going to take that in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We can also read it on Cage's face in the performance, but he just fades to black. We don't really see the resolve of that scene until Red then, just a moment later, emerges from a different cavern to find Jeremiah and just throws her head at him.
It's great, and it really shocks Jeremiah too.
Yeah, yes.
This is where some more of that strobing comes in as the scene fades in and out while Jeremiah pontificates there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, right. In that same way that I was describing before, where sometimes we're actually cutting to different shots, other times it's a fade in and out on the same shot. It's just very unsettling.
Yeah, and Red paraphrases Joseph Campbell here, and he says, "The mystic swims where the psychotic drowns. You're drowning. I'm swimming."
Yes.
Really interesting. It seems like he's sort of found his own religion of violence, of vengeance, and the way that he's approaching this, and he feels like he's been set free by this, and that he's now the mystic.
That's very interesting. I like that read on it. That's interesting. So my take on this, and this is why I want to go back to that exuding a cosmic darkness line too. I kind of think that ultimately what happens here is Red becomes a Black Skull himself. He ultimately does the same drugs that they do. He's wearing their armor by the end. He's driving their ATVs by the end. Like, he sort of becomes one of these Black Skulls by the end of the movie, because I kind of think that, this movie is obviously about grief and the process of trying to go through grief and get to the other side of it. And I think maybe what this movie is about is letting grief turn into rage. And then taking on that rage and finding out that something like vengeance is as hollow as the act that spawns it. There's nothing on the other side of it other than just becoming one of the Black Skulls yourself.
Yeah, I think that it transforms him. I think that not only does he become sort of this scion of darkness, as he's referred to with this cosmic darkness by the chemist, but like I said at the very, very beginning, there's that speech from Reagan where he talks about, this spiritual reawakening, that this becoming a Black Skull. I think that that's a really good way of putting it, where he does put on their armor and stuff and basically becomes one of them to destroy them.
Yep.
It is a reawakening, just not a very nice one.
To me, what is interesting about this movie is I've come around to reading it as a tragedy of, like, this tragedy that happens to Mandy that is then just a further tragedy that happens to Red. He dives headfirst back into his alcoholism.
Right.
I don't know that we're necessarily supposed to think any of what happens in that last hour is in any way heroic or good.
Yeah, he gets dragged down.
Right. Yeah, this is the tragedy of Red and what becomes of Red when he realizes there's nothing left. And I do think that, like, this comes back into some of those sort of tiny images of addiction and stuff, where I wonder if perhaps Mandy and Red had kind of a codependent relationship where they both needed to escape something, and they found each other to sort of abscond into this, like, little fantasy world that they had together out in the middle of nowhere,
Makes a lot
going
of
out
sense
to
me.
these lakes. But it is at the end of the day, it is a codependency that upon the loss of her, he also loses himself.
Absolutely.
I don't know, and I don't know if that's necessarily what Panos is trying to get at with his movie. I think everybody experiences grief in very different and peculiar and particular ways.
Well, I'm picking it up too, man, so.
Yeah, well, I do think, like, so one of my favorite things, to me, some of the best horror movies, like, I know you did an episode on The Shining with Chase Williamson. To me, one of the things about The Shining that I love so much is that movie is basically, I always refer to it as a mirror. Whatever you go into it with is what it's going to reflect back to you. That's what you're going to think it's about.
Right.
And I think Mandy is one of those movies too. It is so much about mood and atmosphere, not necessarily about its particulars and its specifics. And in being that way, it's just kind of whatever anxiety you bring into the movie, I do think it's kind of going to reflect back at you, and that's a little bit what you're going to take away from it, right?
Yeah. I think that when you mentioned before sort of this ineffectual man, pure bluster that Jeremiah Sand has, it's crazy to me in a very realistic way how quickly the bluster falls away.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, again, so funny too.
Yeah.
Where he just offers to suck his dick eventually.
Right. And I mean, for someone like Jeremiah, it's easy to see how this for him would be like the ultimate protestation
Yeah.
and like humbling himself before Red, but Red has no such mercy and kills him by crushing his skull. And
incredible.
God, this moment of release where he just like cuts back and forth so many times, building tension, and then like the eyes and brain just gush out, and Red
very like Lucio Fulci sort of face explosion effects.
Oh yeah, and Red just stands there panting. And it's such a release that not only does he doesn't light a cigarette, he lights the whole goddamn church on fire.
Yep, yeah. Another great image of that church when it starts to collapse, and it does it in that very satisfying way where each point of the triangle falls one at a time. So good.
It is really good. And he watches Sand's body burn before driving away, flashing back to when he and Mandy first met, and then he envisions Mandy in the passenger seat of his car while he is just grinning like an absolute loon.
Yeah, I mean, the Joseph Campbell phrase that he quotes, too, is there are different interpretations of what that means, but I think one of the generally accepted ones is just like there is a very thin line between the psychotic and the mystic. Right. Certainly Red has traversed and perhaps crossed that line rather rapidly.
Yeah. He drives off into the distance, and the landscape around him is now sort of this fantastical and otherworldly sort of landscape that would be very easy to picture in Mandy's artwork. So
yes, or one of the fantasy novels that she likes to read. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, this is the conclusion of his D&D quest.
Right. It's really cool. And so, Garrett, we've reached now the point where we sum up why this is the best horror movie ever. And so, I mean, we've definitely hit on a lot of great points, but why don't you give us a little summary?
I don't know. I have to say this because I can't not say it. I know this is the premise of your podcast, but I have so much trouble with the term best. But what I do particularly love about this one is just, I don't know, this movie literally feels like an actual spell that gets cast. Like, When my partner and I put it on yesterday to watch it, she was like, we just watched this like 3 months ago so you could write about it. I was like, I know, and I'm kind of feeling that too, but let's just watch it again. Within 4 seconds, we were like totally entranced. We didn't speak a word for 2 hours. This movie like is an actual spell that gets cast, and I think... I don't know. I'm not speaking to it as a horror movie, though. That's the thing I always come back to with this movie. It feels so much like it gets commanded by the Nick Cage performance and stuff and the Cage exploitation of it all that you don't even think of it as a horror movie. But I do think the sort of the horror of the tragedy of Red, where he in my view, he becomes one of these black skulls. It's like that's true horror. That is the horror of real life, actually. That's not the supernatural horror that might exist in the fantasy of Mandy. That's the real horror of like we're all going to experience great loss at some point over our time on the, if we're granted even a little bit of time here, we're going to experience some sort of great tragic loss, and that means we're going to have to face this cosmic darkness that Red has to confront, both in himself and the world at large, right? And I think that's like a very real horror, and I like that this movie gets to it through things like imagery as opposed to trying to discuss those things, you know?
Absolutely.
I have no idea if that even was coherent.
No, I think it was coherent. I agree with
that was
what
the
you're
most
saying.
Mandy answer about Mandy I possibly could have given.
Well, we wouldn't have it any other way.
It was just a strobing green light came out of my mouth while I was saying that.
To me, this is the best horror movie ever made because in addition to, I think you're absolutely right, but it also... it does have these great horror moments where things are really grotesque and scary and upsetting, and it's a movie with texture to it. You know, there's a nice film grain on it.
I was going to say quite literally, actually. Yeah.
But in addition to that, it has passion behind it. It has a performance a star performance that you can sink your teeth into, but also really great supporting performances. These great lighting schemes that we talked about, and all of this is propping up something that with one eye you can watch it with this great Nick Cage exploitation movie, and with the other eye watch it with this incredibly sad story of and like you said, tragedy of this man falling to his demons, literally and figuratively.
In my opinion, it's like truly a work of art, right? Yeah. And I don't know, there's probably not a lot of movies in general that I would necessarily categorize that way. But this one, I don't know, it seems so clear to me that there's no other way to think about this movie, that this is one of those things. It's one of those once-in-a-lifetime movies, too, right? It's like, how often does somebody like a Panos Cosmatos get to literally just empty their brain onto celluloid? It really feels that way.
I think that's part of what makes it feel like poetry to me. Like when I said it was a tone poem, that's not just because it has sort of these nebulous story moments, but I think that
Right.
it genuinely does feel like poetry to me.
Yeah, yeah, and the marriage of like the sort of like impressionistic visuals and color schemes, and then the beautiful music that Johann composed. I want to make sure we say her name too, like Andrea Riseborough's performance as Mandy,
Oh yeah.
like those things. Like it's the marriage of all those things and these sort of the brilliance of somebody like Cosmatos that's able to sort of synthesize those things into something like this. I mean, it's just remarkable, I think.
Absolutely, I agree, and that is why this is the best horror movie ever made. Garrett, this was a ton of fun. Why don't you tell the people where they can find you if they want to hear more of that?
Thank you. Yeah, so I have a podcast called I Like to Movie. We're all over the internet. You can find us on iTunes and all your podcatchers and whatnot. And we're on like Twitter and Facebook and all those places. Usually at I Like to Movie. That's the numeric 2. And you can find me on Twitter at Philadelphia. I'm on Letterboxd.com/Philadelphia, where I write about every movie I watch. Yeah, I think that's Cinema76.com. I write a lot over there as well.
As far as my plugs, you can find me on Twitter at LittleHorrorPHL. There is a brand spanking new website that, now that I realize I say that, at the time of airing, will not be brand spanking new anymore. But nonetheless, you can visit the new website at littlehorrorphl.com. You can listen to the show right there. It has links to all the social places. Leave us a rating and a review on iTunes if you're enjoying the show, because it really does help. That's it for me. So thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bone Tomahawk.